the Supreme Court of the United States is set to consider a significant appeal originating from the state of Alabama. This appeal directly concerns the execution of an individual named Joseph Clifton Smith. The case raises fundamental questions about the application of capital punishment. Joseph Clifton Smith is currently 54 years old. He was sentenced to death following a murder conviction in 1997. Despite the passage of time, his conviction and sentence continue to be challenged through the legal system. Please like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. The crime for which Joseph Clifton Smith was convicted occurred in 1997. The victim was Dirk Van Dam. The incident took place in Mobile County, Alabama. The method used in the killing involved beating the victim to death. The implements used were a hammer and a saw. The motive for the crime appears to have been theft. Smith sought to steal belongings from the victim. These items included boots, tools, and a sum of $140. The victim's body was discovered later. It was found in his truck, which was located in a wooded area. This discovery initiated the investigation that led to Smith. Smith eventually confessed to killing Van Dam. However, his confession was not straightforward. He offered two conflicting versions of the events. In his first account, Smith claimed he merely watched Van Dam being killed. In his second version, he admitted to taking part in the act, but asserted he did not intend to kill the victim. A critical legal principle governs the application of the death penalty. Individuals diagnosed with intellectual disability are protected from capital punishment. This protection means they are ineligible for execution. This principle is based on a significant ruling by the Supreme Court. The court established this protection in a decision rendered in 2002. This ruling recognized that executing individuals with intellectual disability constitutes cruel and unusual punishment under the Eighth Amendment. In the case of Joseph Clifton Smith, lower federal courts have made specific rulings regarding his condition. These courts have found that Smith is indeed intellectually disabled. Based on this finding, they have ruled that he cannot be executed under the established legal precedent. The central point of contention in Smith's case revolves around the determination of intellectual disability. A key aspect of this determination involves Smith's IQ scores. Generally, a widely accepted threshold for intellectual disability is an IQ score of 70 or below. Smith's IQ scores have been a subject of scrutiny because they have fluctuated across multiple tests. He has undergone 5 different IQ tests over time. 4 of these tests resulted in scores that placed his IQ in the low to mid-70s range. These scores are close to, but in some instances slightly above, the typical threshold of 70. The Attorney General of Alabama has presented an argument based on these scores. The state contends that Smith's IQ scores do not meet the established criteria for intellectual disability. Therefore, the state argues, his death sentence should be upheld. The Attorney General maintains that the sentence was just and constitutional. Evidence presented in the case points to Smith's long history of struggles, potentially indicative of intellectual disability. He reportedly struggled in school from a very early age, beginning in the 1st grade. An intellectual evaluation was conducted during his schooling. An appeals court cited an IQ score of 75 from this evaluation. In the 4th grade, Smith was placed in a learning disability class. His difficulties extended beyond academics. He was also placed in an emotionally conflicted classroom due to behavioral issues. He reportedly developed an unpredictable temper and frequently fought with classmates. Smith's academic struggles continued, leading him to drop out of school. This occurred after he failed both the 7th and 8th grades. His history prior to the 1997 murder also includes significant brushes with the law. He spent a substantial portion of 15 years in prison for offenses such as burglary and receiving stolen property. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals reviewed Smith's case in May 2023. The court ultimately ruled that Smith could not be executed because of his intellectual disability. The court's ruling detailed his extensive struggles throughout his school years. While acknowledging the complexity, the court characterized it as a close case. However, The 11th Circuit found that the evidence from Smith's IQ tests, combined with evidence of his adaptive functioning deficits, was sufficient to support the finding of intellectual disability. The Supreme Court's consideration of Smith's case involves a broader question. The court is considering whether to make it more difficult for individuals convicted of murder to avoid execution based on claims of intellectual disability. This potential shift could impact numerous capital cases. Alabama's appeal specifically challenges previous Supreme Court decisions concerning the determination of intellectual disability in capital cases. The state urged the court to clarify or potentially overrule two specific precedents: Hall v. Florida, decided in 2014, and Moore v. Texas, decided in 2019. These prior Supreme Court cases rejected methods used by states to determine intellectual disability in the context of capital punishment. Alabama seeks to revisit the standards set in these rulings. The appeal in Joseph Clifton Smith's case has been closely watched. One indicator of its significance is the unusual number of times it was distributed for conference among the justices. The case was reportedly distributed 30 times before the court took action. Adding to the case's profile, an amicus brief was filed by a group of 14 state attorneys general. This brief expressed concerns about the 11th Circuit's decision. They described the ruling as an impermissible intrusion into state sovereignty. The attorneys general urged the Supreme Court to review the 11th Circuit's decision. Furthermore, the brief argued that the court should correct what they termed errant Eighth Amendment jurisprudence. They advocated for grounding Eighth Amendment jurisprudence in the text, history, and structure of the Constitution. This approach stands as an alternative to relying on the concept of evolving standards of decency, which the court has sometimes used in interpreting the Eighth Amendment. On November 4, 2024, the Supreme Court issued an order regarding the case. The order was a per curiam order, meaning it was issued by the court as a whole, rather than signed by specific justices. The action taken was to send the case back to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. The reason provided for this remand was the need for clarification. The court indicated that its ultimate decision on whether to accept certiorari, meaning to hear the full appeal, may depend on understanding the precise basis for the 11th Circuit's decision. The court sought further explanation from the lower court. Justices Thomas and Gorsuch noted their position on the case. They indicated that had the decision been theirs alone, they would have voted to accept certiorari immediately. This suggests a willingness on their part to review the case's merits without further clarification from the lower court. The case of Joseph Clifton Smith has the potential for significant legal impact. It could substantially affect how intellectual disability is assessed in capital punishment cases across the United States. A ruling in favor of Alabama's position could alter the standards courts use. Specifically, the case could potentially make it more difficult for convicted murderers to avoid execution. This would occur if the Supreme Court adjusts the legal framework or evidentiary requirements for proving intellectual disability claims in capital cases. The outcome will be closely watched by legal professionals and advocates on all sides of the capital punishment debate.